We go.
All right, yeah. So we're looking at the 2022 Senate results. I'm looking at a 49-49 split with the Republicans losing one seat and the Democrats gaining one seat. So that checks out. That looks like a red wave to me. What do you think about that?
I thought it was going to be like a tsunami, some sort of great flood of like red that just washes the United States. But it turns out that perhaps their marketing wasn't quite as effective as they thought it was.
Yeah, I couldn't feel the warm red wave as it caressed my face with its loving embrace,
It
the
didn't
back of the
even tickle my
fingertips.
toes. Like it was just completely a fucking wash. I do love how some areas are still counting, like they haven't figured out how voting works.
It does
Um,
look like I'm on freespoke.com, free spoke, which claims to be election results from all viewpoints. I have neither verified nor further researched whether that claim is valid or not, but Georgia is still in a runoff, which looks like for them for Senate is the Democrat lead of 49.42% and the Republican candidate at 48.52. So about a 1% difference, which equates to about 35,000 votes. And everywhere else, yes, including some states that are still taking a few extra days to do what they would like to do, let's say, whether that's what they need to do or uh, other actions.
yeah, stunningly, we've seen some similarities between who whose campaign worked and whose didn't. I think on the Republican side, it seems like if you were more of a Trumper, the worse you fared, and the more run-of-the-mill Republican you were, the better you actually did. To even bring the ire of the Trumpers upon you for being some sort of hack job, rhino, whatever, which yeah, those do exist, but as far as like these state level gubernatorial races and stuff like that, they didn't seem to be as uh, legitimate in my mind.
Yeah, some of the stranger candidates, or at least not stranger, the more atypical candidates, I will say, were in Pennsylvania, at least from what I'm aware of, where you had Mehmet Oz, famous Dr. Oz, and it was interesting that he somehow received the Pope's blessing uh, because like regardless of how you really feel about him as a candidate, it was interesting that he received an endorsement from Trump because our hardcore so-called MAGA Republicans is a pro-choice Turkish man. Does that scream like MAGA Republican? I don't know. That seems like there's perhaps a disconnect there. Like, hey, the it's like I don't know, like just pointing it out. And then also I watched a few different
I mean, like he's
podcasts
also like
that
not from the state. I think that's also like an important thing to throw in there.
oh
He like
interesting.
bought a house like not too long ago just to fit within the confines of how much it, really. But I don't think he's an actual like real long term resident of the state, and I'm using that because he's like, isn't he like TV uh show host, and so he's got to probably live in LA for most of his time or New York or something like that.
This is a good question. I'm not sure where his usual residence is. I only really remember him from his appearances on the Oprah Winfrey show.
It's funny that he just like he lost to a band who can't form a coherent sentence, and it looks like he's a bouncer on the weekends. Um,
It yeah,
it's
it is
very impressive.
very it is impressive, and I can't explain it. I don't know if how many people watched the debates, and if so, did that change their opinion? It is strange that at least from the way that I read the reports, it appears as though he had quantifiable brain damage. So if you have medically quantifiable brain damage and seem to like on camera verbally state that your position is different than what it states online, like there are a lot of disconnects, and Do we want we've apparently made our choice that we are okay with somebody like that to be in control of finances, state military, signing things into law, making really important decisions. And if there is any sort of cognitive impairment, I can't say that my support would be the same.
I think it's really important to point out here too that people have become comfortable with the idea of voting for a party. They just see that D, they just see that R, they make their check mark. They don't really do the scrutiny and due diligence on each of the candidates before they vote. Why that's important is because the intent of having independent representatives is to literally be a independent representative. It's not actually supposed to have these, like, the problem with true democracy is that you always have rule by majority. So you need to build in systems that at least allow for dissidence. And you have situation where the president and then the senator, who seem to both have quantifiable brain damage, are just going to, toe the party line. And like I said, I think a lot of people in the United States, unfortunately, are okay with that. And it has this stronger, it actually works out pretty well conceptually, of like the stronger democratic mentality of majority rule versus something that's more of a republic independent mindset. So it oddly fits here where, I think we're kind of used to both of those parties just being different in name only, having certain um, diverging approaches, but not, I would consider, to be entirely different from one another.
Yes, and I got to be careful how I say this, but we seem to be in this, the pendulum is swinging too far the opposite direction in an attempt to correct a perceived imbalance where we don't want to be ableist. So we're trying to put people who maybe aren't the best for that position in that position in order to like somehow prove a point or tell ourselves that
These types of people not allowed in government because of, a and through no fault of their own, you know a version of a disability that really affects their ability to make the sorts of judgments that we need our representatives to make. So
yes,
it's not that we're saying anything against these people, but it's just like you can't have, you want the best person for the job, and that what we're
can
saying is that we want the best person for the job, but all these other factors shouldn't, things that don't affect it, like race or gender, sexual orientation, these sorts of things that shouldn't exclude you from um in the being inside the race if you still have those other characteristics that allow you to be competent in the field. So we're taking like unrelated things, but we're kind of crossing into this territory where the desire for representation might be so strong that we don't realize we're kind of eating into the other, we're contradicting ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there are physical and mental limitations that are the nature of reality that we should acknowledge exist. Like, when Black Hawk helicopters were coming in to Osama bin Laden's compound, they didn't drop ropes out and then lower a guy in a wheelchair out of the helicopter and then have other members of SEAL Team 6 push this soldier around in a wheelchair while he took shots at bin Laden. That didn't happen because physical limitations are real. And I'm not making fun of him. I'm just saying that that is the nature of reality and of these situations where you have to either have merit to do your job or like a physical ability to do your job.
Right, right. No,
There
I
can
was
be a
laughing because of
mismatch.
how,
Oh,
I really like
yeah.
the use of the hyperbole in order to illustrate this point, for sure. Like, I think people need to kind of realize that there's the comedic effect kind of points to a certain truth here, which is to say that you take something that's so ridiculous in one direction, and then now you can see the difference because maybe, if things are too close, you won't be able to really tell the difference. But yeah, exactly right. And kind of get away from this point, but also kind of merge into like the topic of discussion that we really want to focus in on here. The fact that an able-bodied person lost, I think also really goes to show either how poorly people thought of his character or of his policies. And so the message of Tuesday night was Republicans, if you're going to run better candidates because it doesn't seem to be. I don't want to say that it was absent of other policies that they wanted to put into place, but the fact is that like I can't tell you what a Republican stands for besides just being some sort of Democrat contrarian.
Yeah, that's well said. I was just about to say something anti-democrat, which is really unfortunate that, oh, what's your stance? Well, I'm against candidate Y. Hey, candidate Y, what's your stance? Well, I'm against candidate X. I'm not him or her or zer. And it's like, okay, but what do you believe? Like, what are you gonna do? We want to know what
There's
you're gonna
a
do, right?
there's a
That's
great comic online where it had exactly that, and they're like, "Well, what's your name, candidate?" And he's like, "Not my opponent's name." As
well said. Yes.
more ridiculousness to add to that. No, but it's absolutely true. The thing is that the way that I'm approaching it, and I kind of want to pass this idea on to the audience and for people just to kind of mull over, is the fact that it seems like Democrats are continuously winning. And the thing that worries me, not necessarily because, I mean, one that doesn't welcome in corruption. Whenever you have like a one party that is able to consistently just win on many of the fronts, I worry that this will lead to like the degradation of their own message over time because they won't need it. They're just very easily able to trounce whatever opponents come their way. And it'll take quite a long time for things to like move back, and then they can pass whatever they want. Those sorts of things worry me. So I feel like there needs to be opposition of some point. The problem is that the opposition doesn't even know what they stand for, and yet there are ways that you can articulate what they stand for is very clear cut and very obvious, and they just don't do it. Having this like natural conservative drive of like, hey, we inherited this type of system that was created by a bunch of revolutionaries, at the end of the 18th century. So they made these sorts of rules, and they did build within the system a certain type of like process in which we're able to change rules, but we would have to do so at a slow pace and yada yada yada. Like there's like this real sort of patriotic, sort of historical conservative edge that Republicans could easily run on and be an effective counterbalance to the sort of progression that I think modern people are looking for within the system. But I think that we shouldn't move too fast in that direction because I think that'll just be one, unnecessarily chaotic, and two, come with consequences that are unintended.
There's a good benefit to healthy competition where actual progress is the result. I am not sure if that's happening in the political landscape, but when I look at products like Microsoft versus Apple, they both are able to challenge each other. And now most people have either a Windows computer or a Macintosh computer. People have tablets, smartwatches, which I think overall have improved productivity, access to information. We've really made a lot of leaps and bounds. With politics, I'm not sure.
It's funny too that
I
even
think it's maybe a lot more divisive. And
I, I feel like Macintosh in particular, it's interesting to see them run commercials about, they're proud that they could run Microsoft Office on Apple, and that's actually a selling point. And I feel like that's an interesting concept when we talk about this sort of like not contradictory nature, but like the fact that each side will kind of start to absorb the best parts of each other.
buy this Chevy trailer. It will help haul your Ford to race day. Like something funny like that.
Yeah, you use like a Chevy Silverado to haul like a Ford GT40 to the racetrack.
Yeah, just interesting things.
Yeah, well, I mean, like that's kind of what being an American is in my mind, and I think that that is kind of like our melting potness showing through. We aren't just a bunch of contrary to popular belief, I really don't think that the majority of people in this country are racist, like even the white people. um, Especially not the white people. I just don't think it's true. I don't think you could have a majority of the country vote for Barack Obama, and then you have to also claim that they're also all racists of a certain variety. So to me, it's blatantly not true. I think we like diversity and we like to incorporate diversity, um, and just mix everything together. Like the whole point is like we kind of have this giant buffet that we like to choose from, and we're just making sure that we're not sectioning off parts of the buffet to like an elite class of people who didn't earn it, or like you have some sort of behind closed doors handshake political maneuvers that only allow a certain class of people with either influence or money to be attending these parties. No, America is a party for everyone. It is a giant, and I don't mean like political party, I mean like an actual fun time, everyone's drinking, 4th of July sort of party.
And there is a good question to ask. There are a lot of, if you look at negative sentiment towards the U.S., it's like, well, then why do so many people want to come here? There
Yeah,
aren't
yeah,
people trying to like parents, scrimping and saving to send their child to name country here that I can't name, or no matter what country I name, then I'll be crucified for it. So choose any other country besides the US. We're not sending our people out there, and people aren't dying to get into all these other countries. It's because the
right.
US has a lot to offer, and you can choose a variety of lifestyles. You can keep your own ethnic enclave as well if you want to keep your customs traditions alive within the US. You're allowed to do that. There are ways to support almost any lifestyle within the United States, so long as you pay your taxes.
Right. And like the funny thing is too, a lot of people don't realize, maybe they do, or they're at least starting to realize it. But being around immigrants, they love the country the way it is. And even though they may vote Democrat, which I would say is the prevailing party that seeks to change things, we still have this sort of vision that what they're changing hopefully doesn't interfere too much with what the initial vision of the country is, which is that dream where you can just make it on your own merit if you try hard enough. Which whether or not merit actually exists in that capacity, um, there is something to having a mindset in which you are knowing that there aren't any extraneous barriers standing in your way. And to the extent that those barriers exist, yes, we should seek to eliminate as many of those as we can when we see them and when we find them, as long as we make sure that we're not being needlessly destructive in another area of life, robbing Peter to save Paul sort of mentality, unconsciously.
This makes me think of something I want to rip on most of the Republicans for, which is they seem to be like very against mail-in ballots, even when they're legitimate and assigned to a voter who is legally allowed to vote. And that does tick me off, because anybody who is legally allowed to vote should be allowed to vote. Like, sorry that, if somehow the percentages work out that more people who choose to vote absentee vote Democrat, like, then it doesn't matter, because if you're allowed to vote, then you should be able to vote, and you shouldn't be restrained by some sort of, I don't know, like it seems like a artificial barrier that's placed there. Like, oh, we have to, they changed the laws to make it so you can vote absentee. That's ruining us. It's like, well, it's really just like, is it actually bad, or is it just that it's helping to produce an outcome that's not in your favor?
Right.
And
And
anybody, there should be 100% of people who are allowed to vote should 100% have the ability to vote. Like, it's weird that people have to try to schedule it around going to work, if you work odd hours. Like, I'm not really on board with the, well, it's voting day, not voting week. Like, well, why can't it be voting week? You could find a way to protect those votes, to not like leak the information, which would, then you could make decisions based on partial information and have like, oh, we need more people of this to come out and vote, or whatever those secondary effects could be. If you just make it like, especially a weekend, or make it a federal holiday, as I think you've mentioned before, everybody that should be able to, without restriction, without barriers. It's just like, why? I really don't understand the resistance against that,
Yeah, I mean,
as long as they're
obviously,
valid votes.
yeah, I mean, obviously, we're super in favor of free market. People should be able to go to business and make all sorts of their dreams come true by, helping out the population, getting paid a certain amount that they get in return to it based on market value, yada, 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 yada. This idea that somehow we need to work consistently every single day in this strange sort of like Protestant ethic, obsession is ridiculous. It pisses me off to such an extent too, because it feels like it just we're on the side of corporate interests, of like driving slaves to work every day. And it pisses me off to like such an extreme extent where I'm like, why can't we have more holidays? Why can't we have all these different things? Why do we have to be constantly working? And I can hear people on the other side, well, if you're really for free market, then you wouldn't, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, there's also something to be said of like, there are other values that exist outside the market that I'd also like to preserve. And even though the market's great, it really isn't the God that I worship. So we got to find a way to mediate this, and we should be able to also say without a doubt that, yeah, maybe there should be things inside the government in which we go out of our way to help people who are voters, help them vote, like whether they're old or something like that. Like, let's put something in place, as many things as we can. Mail-in ballots obviously help alleviate a lot of those individual problems. So yeah, translators, whatever you need, that's, yeah. I,
That's a form
I
of
don't want to say
equity
that's,
that actually makes sense.
yeah, and I don't want to say it's your right either, because I don't believe like it can be formulated as a right, but this is a service that we should offer. So I do want to make that also a clear distinction, that all these talks too about like everything being a right, those are complicated topics that I want to save for, later on, just because like there's so much that goes into them that I don't want to brush them or like do them as a disservice. But the larger point being, you're exactly right, that if this is a tradition in our country that we want to preserve, which we do, we want to make sure that voting is fundamental, remains fundamental to what we're doing, then I think that having that available to people is fundamental.
That's fair. That's fair. And something else that does bother me about certain Republican candidates I'd like to mention is, for example, going back to PA with Mr. Doug Mastriano. I couldn't help but notice when he was on the podcast that he has this sense of arrogance, and that no one could compete with him. There was no chance of the opponent. And I get that some of that could just be puffing and people want to make it seem like they're going to win. But also,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like a bit annoyed. Like, and I don't bring this up because I'm personally affected by it. I bring it up because other people are probably also personally affected by it, where it's very easy to be rubbed the wrong way when you interact with somebody verbally, when somebody is kind of I know what's best for you, even if they do know what's best for you. If it comes off in a kind of abrasive way, you're less likely to want to support them just for the humanity aspect of it, like those characteristics. Like, I guess he was a colonel in the military. He probably did some really cool stuff. He probably was a badass, and maybe is a badass. But if you want to get votes, I feel like it was not to his advantage to be all pompous.
Yeah.
That was just like I generally had a negative impression of how he presented himself, even though I think that overall he was probably a good candidate, and maybe I
I mean
would have
that
voted for him.
the image is super important. We are talking again about representatives. You want someone who does fit that ideal mold. It's sorry, but like there are points of our human existence that do rely on simple things like did he say the right things in the right way? Is he signaling the right things? Is he like all of that goes into our judgment of who this person is and why we want them or don't want them for that certain position. So I think you're absolutely right, and it points to something a little bit more fundamental than just the issues at hand. Because if it was just about the issues at hand, then we could just vote those in ourselves. Like why would I need a party to do that? We try to
Yeah,
you
we're not
know
voting for a tax or a levy. We're voting for a person who has greater puppeteer control.
Yeah, which I think at this point in time, if Republicans were wise, they would just eject the entire Trump MAGA bullshit at this point in time because they're saying all the wrong things. And these are all the wrong people. I don't want Herschel Walker. I don't want most of these
Same.
people that have kind of crept up from wherever the boundary of media landscape.
Even Greg Abbott in Texas is not really that Republican on a few different key issues. So, and I also just my final point about people like in PA who ended up losing for governor race. It's when you talk a lot of hot air and then also lose, it's like almost like a nail in the coffin where
Yeah.
they talk the talk but couldn't walk the walk. And it
Yep.
really looks bad at the end where it's not even like, oh, he was very strong in his presentation and he won, so he's just a bully. It's not even that. It's worse. It's much worse than that. It's a really really like loud yapping dog, and it just got maced in the face, and now it's like going to like lick its wounds and has its tail between its legs. Like, yeah, you lost. Oh, really? Oh, real tough. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to extend to um, an olive branch to the people who have voted for Trump up to this point too, because I understand why you voted for him, that you want disruption in DC, and that having these establishment sort of candidates all the time are not only draining, but like they are affecting your quality of living. And I don't think a party really represents this sort of like lower income conservative part of our population of people who just want to live a decent life and they don't want to be necessarily put down upon, whether that's being name called in the media or having their taxes raised. So their discretionary income is much lower for things like if they wanted to increase savings or send their kids to a nicer school or move to a nicer school district. All of these things are incredibly important. The problem with Trump is that he used all of you. That's really the problem. Is we're talking about a guy who thinks of nothing but himself, even if he says the right things. I think fundamentally that should be obvious at this point in time because he signals so many of those other things that they clearly outweigh what I think his message is because otherwise it's not consistent. So I think the American people should do some soul searching. I think one of the best things they could do, quite honestly, is again like try to make friends with the people that are out there. Like, yeah, they don't share your values. No, all of all of my friends don't share my exact values, and that's perfectly okay. You can find other ways to be friends. Like being friends isn't some sort of like instrumental, mechanical, do they check off all the right boxes? It's like, are you polite to people? Are you treating them with respect? Are you trying to find things that you guys do enjoy together and focusing on those things a little bit more? I think we need to reach out to these people. We need to reach out to people of the sort of like MAGA mindset because they're scared, and I get it. And I don't want to just say that I'm doing this to alleviate their fears. I'm doing this because what they're saying and what they fear is legitimate. And we need to find a way to bring that into our conversations when we're voting for um, the other candidates. Because I also think that it's important for the candidates who do win that they understand that their position is tenuous if they do not listen to these people. You know what I mean?
I I can see what you're saying, and it is a difficult territory or land to enter because we've really shifted in the last few years where you're not really allowed to extend an olive branch with the enemy. And because of that, you have to have a strong stance on every single issue. You have to verbalize your stance. You can't just, there are no fence sitters allowed anymore. You can't just not have an opinion on gay marriage or abortion or blue versus red. Like you have to have an opinion, verbalize it, and take a side, or somehow the fence sitters are just as much of an enemy. You're either with us or you're against us.
Yes. Yeah, and
And
that's
especially
kind
with
of like
younger people, especially with like social media, like imagine the number of comments of people were just like, yeah, I really don't feel strongly about this issue. People like, well, how could you not?
yep, yeah,
Any
that's the whole
issue.
point of like the social, what do they call them? Like
It's like
it's whatever
outrage
Obama.
culture.
Yeah, it's what Obama's like position was. Like the social organizer is really a way to like mobilize resentment. And it's very true. Like the younger population is incredibly important. It is a group of people that we are losing at a tremendous rate. And I mean losing as in like we are isolating ourselves from each other. And that is an unwise thing to do. Like as soon as that population breaks, as soon as the older population sort of like abandons the younger population, that's not going to bode well for anyone. The younger population really needs to be integrated into the larger population, and they will naturally change things. I think they like as we were talking about before, things will naturally progress because you have this sort of like friction. Like you walk across the ground because friction exists. It's very difficult to you know, like that's how a tire works, obviously, and all of these different things. You need to have this sort of like overcoming aspect of things. I think is an incredibly important analogy inside our social culture, at least. So, in different ways, the people with lower income, conservatives, and young people who also simultaneously have lower income usually need to be brought into this larger culture. So, I think it's important for the people who do stand up for the winners in our society to also look at the winners and be a little bit more accountable in that way. Instead, I think we kind of have this unfortunate situation where the people who do win, they use this to look down upon the losers even more. So this is ridiculous.
It would be interesting to see some sort of progress sheet be uniformly made for all candidates that get in. And I'm sure that somebody has done this for a few candidates, but if it could become more commonplace that there is a track record of this is what the candidate promised, this is how it's going, this is how far they are to completing their goals of what they said they would do when they got into office, because it's also fairly common when we have these lifers, let's say, who have been in for 20 to 40 plus years, and then they but this time they're gonna change things. It's like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
what about the last 35 years?
yeah. How can you look at like Schumer and Feinstein and Pelosi and just be like, how the fuck did you not fix San Francisco already?
and it's not good enough. It's not acceptable to say, well, it takes time. It's like, yeah, you had time. Or, well, the other party's working against us. It's like, well, that's why you had 30 years.
Yeah,
If
it's
you,
your
what if you
job to
couldn't
mediate
learn,
those things. Yeah,
if you couldn't learn how to do something in 30 years, then regardless of any further explanation, you had your chance. You had your chance. And
yes,
also, you're
absolutely.
probably about ready to retire. Enjoy
It's like
the end
you
of your life, the last functional years of your life where you still have your health.
the reason why I pointed out the specific area in which they lived, or the more importantly, they have influence over. You're talking about people who like really run the party here, and it's important to keep those people as put their feet to the fire, even if they are the people that you agree with fundamentally that you did vote for. The people that you vote for are your responsibility. I think that's something that people like. They only want to side with their the people that they voted for if they're you know functioning the way that they should be, but they're your responsibility no matter what.
If
um
you give somebody a steamroller and they can't make a flat road in 30 years, then take the keys away.
yeah, yeah, they had their chance, and honestly, it's like it's okay for them to go. It's okay. You're not damning them to like some pit of hell. You're just telling them that someone else got the job. That's what life is. Sorry, the a different candidate got the job, and you don't have to be scared about who that might be, and if everyone's secretly fucking Hitler or something like that. It's an insane way of looking at your neighbors in the United States. Yeah, we have good people here. We have bad people here. We have people who are good at the job, and we have people who are bad at the job. And good people wouldn't necessarily make good representatives in government. And at the same time, we want to make sure that the people that you're voting in, you're not just voting in for like these constant like fuck you sort of candidates. That's not going to help governance either. We have to be focused on what is the task at hand and who is the best person for this task.
I like that. And how far along with their goals have they come? Where are we at right now? We just like, it's kind of like a news cycle. Once the news is reported, nobody ever does a follow up. Hey, we got this right. We got this wrong. This is what's happening. We're just in information overload as well. Our own lives are
Yeah,
busy. People are trying to live their own lives. And then it's also more difficult to access this other information about what exactly are our representatives doing. And if I email them, I'm just going to get a generic email back saying, thanks for your inquiry. We're doing everything we can, which is like the biggest weaseler in the world. It's an answer with zero specifics. Hey, what are you doing about this? Well, I assure you, we're doing everything we can.
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
like, it's
Trust.
annoying. It's
Yeah, you have the whole like trust but verify sort of thing. Every time someone comes up for re-election, this is the verification process. So you have to reflect on what did they do these last few years? Did they do things properly? And it's not even so much like, yeah, sometimes problems are bigger than the term that this person's allotted for, but did they make any sort of progress whatsoever? Did they make the right sounds? Does it sound like they're even working on it? Any of these things. What is this person's purpose of being here? I think it's
yeah,
weird that we view politicians and candidates as almost like if you're not voting for them, like somehow you're physically harming them. It seems like there's this sort of like resistance to change. Now I can understand if like you're talking specifically about another party or something like that, but like maybe it's more important if you are a real party member to make sure that your primaries and the people leading up to the elections that you have to sort through are also like properly vetted.
yeah, I can agree with that. I'm not sure if I have anything further to add to that.
I think the last thing that I want to talk about just briefly, and it's not even going to be that long, it might just be whatever statements I'm saying now, more or less, but it has to do with the fact that people, I think, need to respect people's autonomy a little bit more. And just because you are disagreeing with someone on the basis of them wanting to reduce the size of government just because they want to keep more money in your pocket, like people need to realize that money is incredibly important in people's lives. It's not just about this type of services that we're given as a society. And I think this is what the Democrats really need to focus in on. They need to focus on freedom, autonomy, and um, maybe liberty's too little too much of a synonymous term, but I'm going to say it anyway. Um, and liberty a little bit more in this country because everything to them is like tax, 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 control this, control that. It's like, okay, like, why don't you? They haven't busted a single fucking huge corporation. They're so anti big business that they have allowed all these big businesses to flourish. And it's incredibly upsetting when everything comes down to, oh, well, you poor people will give you these different services and then you'll be happy. And it's like, you can't just take away my entire paycheck. Even if you were to give me some of the same stuff that I would buy for myself, it wouldn't be everything. You can't calculate that. You didn't even talk to me. You don't even know who I am.
So in an
Maybe I
ironic
don't
twist of
eat.
fate, now the Democratic Party is believing in the invisible hand and the trickle down effect.
Yeah, but like only for people of a certain class. They've become so classist that it's incredibly problematic. Now, there are some people in the Democratic Party that do make the right sounds that I really enjoy, but sometimes the like this democratic socialists or whatever they call themselves, they don't sound great. Then that's why people don't vote for them. It's like I don't care like why you think you can just take my entire paycheck and make it for these different projects and I'll just be fucking happy about it is not treating me like an independent human being. It's not respecting my consent in any of these things. And if
Yeah.
they had that sort of knowledge, I think they would, one, be better candidates, and two, well, they probably wouldn't even be democratic socialists at that point in time. They just have this sort of like high and mighty feeling towards what people should and should not be doing with their lives.
Yeah, ultimately that is ethnocentrism. That's in a really bad way. It's them thinking, I know what's best for everybody, therefore I am superior to other people, and other people owe me their money because I know how to spend it better than them, which means that you think that you're smarter than them, that they're stupid in relative comparison to you, that you're somehow just superior in every way. Otherwise, you would not be trying to implement those policies. By implementing those policies, it is self-evident that you subscribe to that ideology.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Even if it is unconscious, well, we're making it conscious right now.
Yeah, they
you
want to talk
know,
about unconscious bias. There you go, right there.
Yep, absolutely. And it's like it doesn't matter what they physically do with it. And this is one of those things where like data doesn't really help you. Yeah, if the poor person is spending all their money going to casinos and gambling it all away, that is their choice to make. Okay, it's like you can't just swoop in all of a sudden and be like, I am going to commandeer the value of your labor and make sure that you do better with it. As
Yeah,
it's just absolutely ridiculous.
I agree. You live your life, I'll live mine. As long as there's no like, glaring crimes being committed, then just
Yep.
just let me live my life,
So
right?
that's one specific aspect, and I think the second one has to do specifically with children and education. It's these are under the guardianship of the parents, and if Republicans want to bounce back from being the party of fucking nobodies, then they would do well to heed this warning and focus on the oikos. Oikos is the old Greek term for the household. You should be the parties of families and tradition.
Hmm.
It doesn't necessarily have to be the Christian tradition, but in our Western civilization, there is an aspect in which Christianity certainly can be involved. But more importantly, there's also this idea of the oikos. There's this idea of the household. We don't, sure, we have apartment buildings, but we mostly just have houses which are made for a nuclear family. And this is so fucking common across the United States that you could say that it's part of our culture. So if you want to focus on something, focus on that. And Democrats, I really wish you would stop trying to be like the Pied Piper and steal people's children. It's pretty wrong. Again, you're not the masters of the universe. And even if people are doing things that you wouldn't necessarily do, or you could consider in your own value calculus that you could optimize whatever living situation these people have, butt out. That's not what freedom is.
And equality is not viewing people who are homeschooled as some sort of enemy that need to be squashed out and forcibly assimilated.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the red wave wasn't. But you know what? There is a large red sentiment that still creeps up through the soil in America. There's a
Hmm.
natural type of conservatism that exists here because we are focused on family, community, and freedom. So if these DC Republicans who want to play contrarian, um, want to maintain having any sort of semblance of authority in this country, then I think they would be wise to actually figure out what it is that their base wants. Um, but also more importantly, figuring out what they need in context of our already set government system and hold the line. You know, if you're supposed to be the guardians of the past, then do it properly. Then you might get your red wave one day.